How can water systems truly serve everyone? Public systems function as a public good for all. And I'd argue that it's too often that public goods don't really function as public goods for everyone.
Art is a superpower, it is a weapon, it is a hammer. Art is one of the natural predators of power.
However, the U.S., one of the wealthiest nations in the world, access to safe, affordable, trusted water is actually far from universal.
Water and blood, I am the comfort in the company misery loves. I am the solemn oath and the broken promises, the feelings of desire.
Actually testing the water, we found that 88% of households actually had at least one secondary maximum contaminant. It doesn't just affect one household. It erodes the social contract that we have between water providers and communities.
And being in the right relationship means being in relationship with one another.
The stewards of the land, stewards of the water knew what they were doing for a really long time. I think somehow we're gonna have to go back to understanding the indigenous perspective.
What you're going to do when the water keeps rising, realizing that the water won't drown us.
The question here is not really whether or not we have the science to fix this. The question is whether we have the will to invest equitably, listen to communities, and hold systems accountable.